Here, Tracy Hudson, Leadership Specialist for Delaware Academy for School Leadership for the University of Delaware. And I want to welcome you today to part 2 of Rethinking School Leadership to support teacher candidates and strengthening the pipeline. We're so excited to have you here. And I know this is a busy time of year. Everybody's got a lot of things going on. So we'll probably have, many more people registered for this session. And so they'll probably be joining us along the way as we get started. So happy to have Elizabeth Salslau to join us today to present. Her co-presenter is not going to be able to be here today, Monique Alexander, but Elizabeth is an associate professor in the University of Delaware School of Education, and some of you may have worked with her previously. I'm going to put her full bio in the chat. I read it on the last session, but that way you can read it if you were not able to attend the first session. So Elizabeth, I'm in the chat. I'm going to put the PowerPoint in the chat so Elizabeth gets started.
Okay, well, welcome everyone, and I very much appreciate you being here. I know the weather is absolutely gorgeous, and some of us have children running around in the background as school's wrapping up, and some of us are just on overload after the insane year that we've had. So I really appreciate you taking this hour for us to be together and talk, and I hope this will be useful to you. Just as a reminder for friends that weren't with us last week, this is part 2. Part 1 is available on the DAZZLE website. And the majority of the talk today and the talk last week is based on this text called The Comprehensive Guide to Working with Student Teachers, Tools and Templates that Support Reflective Professional Growth. The book is actually really good for anybody who works with any novice teacher. So folks who work with induction, folks who work as teacher coaches and things like that. So just a little plug here for the book and letting you know that the information today will come from the book.
And I'm going to put the link for the book in the chat as well, so you can look for that if you're interested in seeing that.
Thank you, Tracy.
Okay.
Next, I just wanted to acknowledge, as Tracy said, Monique couldn't be here. She got pulled away at the very last moment, but today's presentation and obviously the book would not be possible without Monique. So I want to make sure that Monique gets her due credit. So this is Monique Alexander. She's an assistant professor at Slippery Rock University. Her research focuses on supporting Black and Brown students at the collegiate level, and she teaches courses in equity, diversity, and in student teaching. Similar to myself, I teach the same courses at the University of Delaware. I work in both the undergraduate, master's, and doctoral program, but the very best part of my job is working with student teachers in the field, who we affectionately now call teacher candidates. So I get to work in the Red Clay School District in particular. I'm at Warner Elementary School. I've been working there for about 6-7 years now and been through some transitions with leadership there. So a very, very quick review of what we talked about last week, just 2 short slides. One is that the whole context for this is that we're talking about patching up the pipeline. So we're all struggling, particularly in the state of Delaware, with making sure that we have high quality teachers coming through our doors day in and day out, and that we retain those teachers. So if we look at this quote from Kate Walsh from NCTQ, we know that improving the student teaching experience has the highest impact and is the most cost-efficient way to improve the pipeline. So last week, we talked about how we can pick the best clinical educators to support our candidates. And we also talked about embedding the candidates in the school community as well as the neighborhood that your school serves. So if you haven't had a chance to see that presentation yet, please go back. It's on DAZZLE's website, and Tracy put the link in the chat. Today, I'm going to share a framework that, if used, will strengthen the quality of the candidates you recruit into your pipeline, as well as increasing the quality of the in-service teachers who are already on your full-time teaching staff. So I know we have assistant principals and other administrators on the call today who probably work with novice teachers and have a coaching model in their school, or all of you are working with induction. Hopefully the ideas today will also apply to those particular scenarios. So please note, the framework can be interchanged with teacher candidates in service, novice teachers who are at the induction stage, in-service teachers on improvement plans, or even veteran teachers who want to engage in continuous professional development. I've never met a high quality veteran teacher that didn't want to keep learning, myself included. So the term teacher candidate can be exchanged with all these things, and teacher educator likewise can be exchanged or interchanged with clinical educator, which is the classroom teacher who hosts our candidates, a classroom mentor, an induction coach, an assistant principal doing an instructional walkthrough, and so on. So before I get to the framework, I kind of want to get us all on the same page about what we mean when we say teacher learning. I define learning outcomes similar to scholars like Barbara Rogoff as transformations of participation as a result of participating in a learning community. So that's a mouthful. It's basically how teachers evolve within the learning community itself and how they enhance and contribute to that community and to their own practice over time. So in student teaching, obviously the community is comprised of the clinical educator, which is the classroom teacher, the teacher candidate, people like me, the university field instructors, and the pupils. And then you can imagine other scenarios where you have a novice teacher, an expert teacher, and a teacher coach and students. So the first type of teacher learning we're interested in is called adaptive teaching expertise. And adaptive teaching expertise is a set of skills that enables a teacher to adapt her planned instruction based on pupil cues in real time, adjust the curriculum to serve contextual demands, and balance experimental teaching approaches against risks to pupil learning and well-being. So we have lots of teachers that are enthusiastic to try out new instructional methods or new curricular components on their students. Can they balance that risk to their own students' learning and well-being? When a candidate notices that pupils are bored during a lesson, which I'm sure never happens in any of your schools, or the students are confused or they're frustrated, the teacher has to enact a change. But the ability to notice, identify a cause, select an alternative instructional approach, and then implement that adjusted instruction in real time is incredibly complex, let alone if you're trying to do it as a novice teacher candidate or a novice teacher in front of a classroom full of kids who are watching every move you make. So adaptive expertise is also what enables a teacher to apply tenets of culturally relevant and sustaining pedagogy, because you have to have a deep, rich understanding of your children, the community, and the context in which you're teaching, and then adapt everything based on that understanding. It also helps teachers use restorative practice frameworks. So the second teacher learning type is growth competence. So this is really leveraging that power of two. You have two educators talking about teacher learning and student learning. So here we're focused on candidates' competencies to co-assess their teaching practices now so that they develop the ability to self-assess their own teaching in the future. The ability to systematically reflect on practice and use those reflection skills to improve practice is not an innate set of skills. You're not born with the ability to do this. These skills have to be taught and rehearsed. I'm going to repeat that. You're not born to be a teacher. You learn how to be a teacher. This is also known in the literature as internally directed learning or preparation for future learning. So think about it this way. How many of you have heard an expert teacher give advice to a novice in the form of, don't worry, you'll get better with more experience. You just need more experience. I see Carmen nodding. We've heard this before, right? The more experience you get, the better you'll be. This seems super logical, but it's actually not true. If experience is all it takes to improve teaching practice, why are some veteran teachers continuing to fail our children? Third, collaborative expertise. Candidates and novices can learn how to collaborate in a community of practice by building intersubjectivity, which again is a big fancy word we'll unpack in a bit, coordinating contributions, sharing meaning, empathizing, and making space for disagreement. These skills enable candidates to become contributors as future members of professional in-service learning communities. Further, these skills help novice teachers learn how to advocate for innovative pedagogies or instructional practices that support their pupils, and they learn how to represent the field of teaching as a valuable profession to outsiders. So, how do we get there? How do we develop these three skill sets? Let's explore an example together. So this is a little audience participation. And I know that like myself, when I'm watching a webinar, I'm always multitasking because I'm getting a million emails and phone calls while I'm trying to listen to someone speak to me. And I know I'll just watch the video later and I'll get what I missed. So that's totally fine. If you want to participate, you are more than welcome to put your answer in the chat. Tracy's going to moderate the chat, or you can unmute and share as well. So in this example, I want you to look at this picture, and let's imagine we're watching a teacher educator or induction mentor watching an expert and a novice at practice. They're watching a lesson being co-taught. So since the University of Delaware uses a co-teaching model for student teaching, this scenario is probably very familiar to you. You might also imagine a mentor teacher working with a novice educator. So here we have the co-teachers, the classroom teacher, which is the expert, and the teacher educator, which is the novice, and they're using the one teach, one assist configuration for co-teaching. So we know that quite often, especially in the beginning of a student teaching placement, the clinical educator is lead teaching and the candidate takes the role of support or assist. So this is what's happening in the example you see here. Imagine you're the teacher educator. You have the binoculars, you're wondering what's going on. Maybe you're the principal, assistant principal, instructional coach. What do you think in this scenario the novice teacher is trying to accomplish? Okay, they're moving around through the students holding a clipboard. See how many reasons you can come up with. Post a reason in the chat. There's no wrong answer. I'm asking you to make a wild guess here. And if you're comfortable sharing out loud, you're welcome again to unmute. What is that novice teacher doing? Circulating around with a clipboard while the expert is leading instruction. I'll give people another 30 seconds if they want to share. If not, I have plenty of ideas to share with you.
I'll throw one out there. Is she checking for student engagement?
Great one, Tracy. Are kids on task? Are they focused? Monitoring student. You stole Carmen's answer.
Sorry, Carmen, didn't mean to steal yours. Great minds think alike.
I should have just unmuted myself. I should have just unmuted myself.
EDUCATOR Jones says aggressively monitoring, seeing what is on the student's desk that's different from others. Nice. Using that proximity control, seeing what's the students are actually engaged in, because we know sometimes students pick really fun ways to entertain themselves that may or may not be related to our lesson. So these are, go ahead, Carmen.
Also, if the steps would have been sporadic, maybe assisted certain students.
Absolutely, yep. Locating students that might need additional assistance or even acceleration, right? So we have ideas like monitoring pupil self-control, encouraging collaboration between kids, maybe identifying kids to share out whole group after the teacher's done leading. Maybe they're providing incentives. Maybe your school has a PBIS or a token economy system. Maybe they're recording some formative assessment data on that clipboard. Maybe they're giving praise or encouragement. Maybe they're determining completion rates so they can tell their teacher, you can go faster or you can go slower for pacing. And then, as Carmen said, determining needs for support or acceleration. And then, as EDUCATOR and Tracy said, really monitoring to see what's going on with the kids. So the point here is that the novice could have lots of reasons for circulating or taking anecdotal data. Right, excellent, Carmen. So the point is that the novice could have lots of reasons for circulating, but as an observer, we don't actually know what they're doing because their thinking is invisible to us. We can only see their physical behavior. So when we ask the candidate what she's doing, she tells us two things. And this happens over and over and over again in our research. She says, or he says, or they say, I was told to remain active, even when the expert teacher was in a lead role. So I thought I should walk around. I noticed the expert teacher circulating when I'm leading instruction, so I figured I should walk around too. So here we see, and I see EDUCATOR nodding her head. EDUCATOR or EDUCATOR? I want to make sure I'm saying your name right. Please help me.
It's EDUCATOR.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, EDUCATOR. So we have mimicry and compliance. And the problem with mimicry, that's a hard word to say, and compliance is that if the student teacher or the novice teacher, the teacher candidate, or the induction person who's in their first few years teaching, doesn't understand the invisible thinking behind why they're doing something or why the person they're observing is doing something, they can't adapt that practice, they can't apply it properly, and they certainly can't adjust it based on their understanding of a particular student's needs or the context. So I did something really unfair. I asked you to make assumptions and attributions based on a scenario, right? But we're asked to do this all the time when we're observing instruction. So oftentimes these attributions and assumptions rely on bias. So for example, lots of research shows that teacher educators fall prey to something called the halo effect. This means that if I have a positive image of the teacher I'm observing, maybe based on a prior relationship, or they graduated from a really fancy college, or their race, their gender, or some other personal attribute, I'm going to give them positive feedback across all the teacher evaluation domains, creating this halo effect, because I assume that the novice teacher has the best intentions when I'm observing them, like we all did. Obviously, this can work in the reverse, which is dangerous and unhealthy and obviously unjust. If we have a bias based on a negative association with a novice teacher's attributes or background, then I'm going to assume the worst and evaluate them accordingly. Biases and assumptions are everywhere. And as a few examples, I'll share some experiences that our participants reported in research. So first, a field instructor observed a candidate pull a small group of children to work with her at a back table during independent work time, just like we ask everyone to use flexible grouping and differentiate their instruction. So that's what the field instructor assumed the candidate was doing. However, in the post-observation debriefing conference, when the field instructor asked the candidate to share a little bit about her rationale, like why'd you pull those kids in the back, what was up with that? The candidate said she was told to differentiate her instructional approaches, so she pulled her favorite students to work in a small group, as she'd seen her clinical educator pull small group. And she knew that the kids would act really good for her. So she wanted to show off that she could be a good teacher by pulling her favorite students. So the candidate complied with the request and mimicked what she saw her teacher do, but she had no idea and didn't have a sound pedagogical reason for selecting these particular students for a small group. A second colleague that we interviewed noticed that a candidate had collected pre and post test data before teaching her lesson. Fabulous, right? We're going to measure student learning here. In the post-lesson observation conference, the field instructor asked the candidate to compare and contrast the pupil's results on the pre-test with the results on the post-test. Smart. While comparing the data, the candidate noticed that the results were identical. The majority of children had scored 100% on the pre-test and 100% on the post-test. At least they did not learn something during the meeting, right? So the field instructor asked the candidate if she used the pre-test data to adjust the lessons, since the children obviously had a solid grasp of the content before she taught the lesson. And the candidate was dumbfounded. It hadn't occurred to her to actually use the pre-test data to accelerate and modify her instructional plans. I affectionately call this kind of data dead data. The third one is an enduring issue many of us have faced. Most of my colleagues shared a variation of this example. When candidates are asked to assess their own instruction, candidates report that the lesson went really well, which is great, that they have a sense of efficacy. We want that, self-belief. But when asked for a justification for their judgment that the lesson went well, the candidate reports that they completed the lesson on time and that the kids had fun with no intention in examining the learning outcomes. While pacing and engagement are great, without evidence of pupil learning, they are insufficient evidences for claims that the lesson was successful. So all of these examples are troubling. If the field instructor doesn't ask the candidate for a rationale, the invisible thinking stays hidden, and the field instructor or lesson observer or assistant principal or coach mentor could easily assume that the candidate was engaging in good teaching practice. However, every attribution or assumption functions as a narrowed, missed learning opportunity. When novices don't understand the decision they're making behind an expert teacher's thinking, they're left with 4 options, 2 of which we talked about: mimic and comply, do something on the fly, just make it up, or do nothing and panic like a deer in headlights. In contrast, when invisible thinking is made visible, when teacher educators push novices to produce those rationales, the ability to improve on a fully understood practice can be realized. We can only learn to improve on a teaching practice if we understand the underlying purposes and rationales of the practice in the first place. So what needs to change? While there are ample opportunities to discuss teaching practice with novices during pre-meetings or pre-lesson or lesson planning meetings, the research shows that the biggest bang for your buck, and I know that the administrators on this call are looking for efficiencies because your lives are already inundated with many, many school tasks. The efficient part is the reflection based on the post-lesson observation conference. So the question remains, what needs to change? What can teacher educators do to improve the reflective practice of novice teachers to move them toward the learning outcomes we care about: adaptive expertise, growth competence, and collaborative expertise? Before I share the post-observation framework that we've developed, I want to pause and ask, what do you think is the most popular opening question that a teacher educator or lesson observer or assistant principal or other person who's doing an instructional walkthrough or observation, what's the first question they usually ask the novice teacher during that post-lesson observation conference? How do you feel the lesson went? Thank you, Renee. How do you think the lesson went? Quetta says it too.
Or do you have any questions?
Okay, or do you have any questions? Thanks, Carmen. So I think that we have some consensus around here. How do you think the lesson went? So what we've learned in our research, that how do you think the lesson went, is actually not a helpful opening question. But the question has really good intent. You're asking the candidate or the novice to self-evaluate, which is incredibly important. And we should be building towards this question where the candidate or the novice teacher can evaluate how they think it went. But many novices aren't sure how to self-evaluate in a way that actually improves their instructional decision-making. So this question we found in our research with candidates can also serve as an unintended setup. So imagine that a teacher educator asks this question and the novice responds with, "It went great." But in reality, it didn't. I see Quetta's nodding her head. This has happened, right? It is much harder to burst the novice teacher's bubble than it is to lead them through a self-reflective series of assessment questions that helps them determine for themselves whether or not their lesson was successful. So what am I talking about? Let's turn to the framework. So rather than beginning an evaluation debriefing session with how do you think it went, teacher educators who center pupil learning as the focus of their debriefing conversations begin post-lesson conferences with a framing such as, what did you want the kids to learn? What did they already know about that? How did you assess their prior knowledge? How did you use that prior knowledge to impact your decisions? Did they learn it? Like something new? Did they learn something new? And then how do you know? I'll have my candidates say, well, so-and-so and so-and-so gave the right answer. That's 2 out of 30 children in your classroom. How do you know the rest of the kids learned something? So you're pushing for evidence, tangible, observable evidence. And then what do these data tell you? Should you accelerate your instruction? Should you reteach? Should you remediate? Do you need to adapt? Can you just move on? So this is the heart of what we want our post-observation conferences to look like. Exploring pupil work or including any observational or anecdotal notes taken during the lesson really helps the novices root their instructional improvements in actual data. And I don't know if your in-service teachers feel this way, but as soon as our candidates hear the word data, they freak out. What they don't understand is that data is everywhere. Observing a kid's physical reaction, observing a kid speaking with another student during a think, pair, share, observing a kid writing something, having kids hold things up on whiteboards. These are all data that clue the teacher into the sense-making process of their students. So once novices analyze evidence from the lesson, they can begin to use a rationale-based discourse to interrogate their own instructional decisions and make adaptive changes to future instruction. So this is where all the light bulbs go on. Your candidates go, oh no, I didn't collect evidence of student learning. Or I did, but only from a small group. Or they all filled out this worksheet, but I modeled how to answer it. So all I've assessed is their ability to copy me, right? And so now you don't have to burst any bubbles. The candidate or the novice teacher is realizing where their instruction might have gone off the rails based on the pupil learning, the evidence that they've collected. So of course, there are lots and lots of other questions besides the ones posted here that teacher educators can ask and should ask their novice teachers. And this framework's expanded on in our book. We have an entire chapter dedicated to conferencing with novice teachers. It includes over 30 suggested questions and prompts to help novices evaluate their own instruction. So the big takeaway here is that the questions I shared, and obviously the additional tools and templates from our book, can help teacher educators unmask invisible thinking. However, believe it or not, unmasking invisible thinking during the post-observation conference is critical, but it's not sufficient. We also need to make sure that the novice teacher has deemed the conversation as containing something of personal value for their own learning. In essence, we want to know, are we on the same page here? First, we know that we must build intersubjectivity and empathy. So as I promised before, intersubjectivity just means that we understand each other, we can make space for disagreements, but that we aren't ships passing in the night. We're not talking past each other. And empathy means that we can put ourselves in the shoes of the other and engage in some perspective taking. So to make this process work, novices must see themselves in dual roles. They must see themselves as teachers of learners and learners of teaching. And this goes for novice teachers, expert teachers, mentor teachers, coach teachers, any teacher. When this condition is satisfied, teacher educators explicitly make problematizing of practice a normal part of teacher learning. We're all learning here. We're all making mistakes. We're all experimenting. To embody these dual roles as a teacher of learners and learner of teaching, we must attend to ideas of positioning, power, and agency. Since novices have expertise grounded by innovative and current methods courses, novices should be viewed as being immediate contributors, making the role of that knowledgeable other or expert very fluid. Novices begin to build a sense of agency, and then they can participate in their community and move from being a passive receiver to active generator to lead generator of ideas to improve practice. Teacher educators must invite candidates into these co-evaluation spaces. If they don't, novices often continue to position themselves as subordinate to their clinical educator or their field instructor, and thus they embody a passive support role in the classroom and become passive in their own learning. So one strategy I'll share with you today, and of course there are more in the book, is called meta-conferencing. And as you all know, if you place the word meta in front of any other word, it effectively just duplicates that word. So in this case, we're talking about conferencing about the conference. Our framework includes meta-conferencing as a closure to the post-observation conference. Teacher educators can do this in a number of ways. You can ask the novice to share responses to questions like, what are your 3 big takeaway ideas from what we talked about today? What will you think about most on your drive home? What will you tell your colleagues about this conversation? Because you know your teachers are talking to each other. What is the most valuable thing we discussed and how will it impact your instruction tomorrow? It's important here that the novice teacher owns the information. All the research on adult learners has proven time and again that if a novice teacher doesn't find the feedback valuable, they will not apply it to their own practice. You'll just get a lot of smiling and nodding during your conference. So to review the teacher learning types we know support teacher learning growth and development, I wanted to talk about the fact that these learning types are the big umbrella skill sets for the smaller size skills we're trying to develop in teachers. So for example, on the DPAS, there are criteria that fall under planning, instruction, management, and assessment. A great exercise for the beginning of the school year that we talk about and explain in our book is a sorting activity where teachers sort each criteria from the formal evaluation form into these 3 categories using a Venn diagram. And then they engage in conversations about any criteria that doesn't fit. And they identify new competencies that might need to be assessed that are outside the form. I think we can all agree on this call that adaptive expertise or adjusting, teaching on the fly, balancing risk to pupils with experimentation, and adapting instruction based on contextual needs is incredibly important. Growth competence, learning how to learn, incredibly important. And that collaborative expertise, learning how to advocate for yourself, your pupils, your families, the profession, while positively contributing to the school community and to PLCs. These are all non-negotiable skill sets for any competent educator. So for those of you that are administrators or have an administrator's ear that you can whisper into, I want to close by encouraging all school leaders to support their teacher educators. And I know that I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but here are some ideas. Buy your teachers some resources. Contrary to some belief, teachers do read academic articles and will read academic texts. A great teacher gift would be our book. Some principals have also worked out release time schedules. Hosting candidates is a great way to do this because it provides a natural coverage for the teacher to engage in mentorship. Continuing ed credits can be worked out, especially if the University of Delaware is involved. I personally worked with the Partnerships in Public Education under the direction of Dr. Liz Farley-Ripple to do equity trainings at Shoe Middle School, and I've also done some justice education-based trainings for teachers at Warner Elementary School. And all the participating teachers receive credits toward their state license renewals. You can pitch these mentorship roles as pathways to leadership. Every educator should have a clear pathway to promotion, whether their goal is to lead from the classroom or beyond, and mentoring novice teachers or candidates. And finally, invite mentor teachers who serve as clinical educators to engage in turnaround training. Teachers who serve as teacher educators learn a lot through that power of 2. Invite them to share what they've learned with others. So we don't have time to engage in a meta conference right now. So I've laid out 4 points that I hope illustrate what you'll take away from our time together today. First is to unmask invisible thinking. The second is to focus all of your post-observation conferences on pupil learning. The third is to engage in the types of conversations that ensure that you and the novice teacher are on the same page. And finally, for those of you in a position, please, please, please support your school-based teacher educators. So Monique and I would like to continue the conversation. We're going to open up time for questions now, but we have our email addresses here, and I can also drop those into the chat. But if you want any articles, if you don't want to buy the book, I have some articles that are totally free. I can email them to you that also explain some of the things I talked about today. But I'm going to stop sharing now and take some time for questions.
Elizabeth, one thing I did note, I just recently finished the first 4 days of the new teacher evaluation training that some teachers, some districts are piloting next year. And everything you said aligns with the framework. It's all about what are the students doing? And looking at the students, and so I thought this aligns so nicely with that framework. So if anybody hasn't had a chance to look at that, they may want to look at it and see how it aligns with everything that you said.
Thank you, Tracy.
I could add one observation. I know I did a lot of lead mentoring in the past, and often mentors need that guidance on how to have a comfortable conversation with the teacher, and the opportunity to challenge the new teachers to reflect is essential, because first of all, when you teach somebody something, you're becoming a better teacher. That guidance allows you to reflect, am I following all the steps in the process? So this workshop would actually be very beneficial to be provided at the induction mentoring level for the state.
Well, Carmen, you have my email. So Monique and I do professional developments and workshops. The summer free summer webinar series is a little teaser of what we can provide, but we have lots of different trainings we can offer for exactly the purposes you're indicating. So please, please, please send me an email.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Feel free to tell me where I got it wrong too. I'm here to learn too.
And I will be sending, it takes a few days to process the video, but I will be sending that out. So if you need to talk to somebody else and share this work with them, you'll have the video, and they're going to be posted on the DASL website as well.
Yep. And if someone wants the my notes, like my script that I use, I'm also happy to share that with you too. I'm also happy to do the training, but if it's not in your budget, I don't want to cheat you out of the information. I'm happy to share the script.
Does anyone have any questions or comments that they would like to share at this time? Well, I want to thank Elizabeth for sharing this information. I've had student teachers in my building, and I've also supervised student teachers. So I wish I'd had your book, Elizabeth, when I was doing that. It would have been so helpful, but it really resonated with me. So hopefully it helped you as you think about this. And so important to give these student teachers a good start, because that's going to determine what kind of teacher they're going to be. You can get some fabulous teachers if they just get that support and mentoring from the beginning.
Thanks, Tracy. And I'll do one more plug, but again, please know I have articles I can send you that are free if it's not in your budget to purchase the book. But the book does make a great gift for any teacher in your life. You can get your holiday shopping out of the way now. I think it's a good resource, guys. It's written in a really easy to understand language. There's not a lot of jargon or anything like that. And there's some reproducible templates that you can use. Yeah, it's getting good feedback. But again, if it's not in your budget, shoot me an email. I can send you articles and other things to help you and your school community.
And I put the link back in the chat in case you came in late and didn't see it. So any resources, just let us know. We'd be glad to share them.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. I hope that you get some chances to go outside today and enjoy the beautiful weather. And really, I just really appreciate it. I have a lot of gratitude for you taking an hour out of your day today. I know everyone is at capacity with the insane year we had. So please know, I'm really sending you my thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for attending. So Elizabeth, I think it's just you and me. I thought very good. I hope you don't mind me throwing that in about the new teacher framework, because I just kept thinking about it when you were talking about what they were supposed to be doing. It aligns so much, looking at that prior instruction, looking at assessment,